There was the first collection with all black, little black dresses. The second collection was a spring collection that was hot pink and white and just gorgeous, stylized dresses. Amazing. And 25 to 30% of that carbon was from steel mill emissions. Mind blowing.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Good. How about you, Erum? It's been a very eventful week and there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. There's a lot of things going on work-wise, for sure. And we're trying to do a lot of research. Also enjoying some shows. You do recommend some great movies to me. And you recommended a movie to me because I was telling you about a documentary I watched on Netflix about telemarketing. I think it's called Telemarketing, but you said, oh, you should watch this movie called Sorry to Bother You. And you said that you were blown away by it because you watched it at a theater, at the BAM Theater here in Brooklyn, and that everyone was like kind of shocked. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me check it out. And what a bizarre movie. It was so
awesome
bizarre.
Movie.
It blew my mind.
It's funny because I don't think of it as it's a bizarre movie, but it's like a surreal commentary on our present day. I thought of it as being more absurdist than bizarre. Like bizarre to me is Barren, which came out earlier this year, which is a horror movie that had some really crazy stuff happen in it. But Sorry to Bother You, which is probably for sure in my top 20 best movies, is just a surreal, hilarious, weird movie. But what did you think about it?
Yeah, so Sorry to Bother You is again about a person's journey to getting a job, rising up the ranks, and
the American dream.
The American dream, working at a big corporation, and then secrets are revealed about that corporation and what they're doing to make money. This person, the lead character, the hero, was a part of it and then tries to make things right. So I don't want to give away too much, but I kind of have to give away a little bit because this is why we were talking about it on the podcast, like telemarketing movie, why we're talking about this on the Grow Everything podcast. Well, one part of the movie, they talk about the workers of a specific company where they provide labor services, and they have employees, they're trying to accommodate employees and make it sound like there's a lot of employee benefits where you can live in the office and you get all of these perks of food, community, and really ends up becoming like slave labor. They are also taking the next step to genetically modify the employees to be stronger, more capable of doing work. It's insane. I don't want to give too much, but it is like, okay, these people are, in the movie, the people are being genetically modified to work more, and it's all against their will. I was like, oh, I have to talk about this with Karl on the podcast because we talk about genetically modifying foods. And, we sometimes dabble in like, what does that look like to genetically modify humans to be pre-vaccinated for diseases? You'll hear an interview that we have with Michael Spector where he talks about incorporating a vaccine in the gamete cells and being pre-vaccinated for things. Still controversial, but could be helpful. But what if you can opt in to be genetically modified to have a higher performance? And if you can opt in to that, would you do it? So what are some things off the bat you think, Karl?
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so there's a bunch of things, actually. So first, when John Cumbers and I wrote What's Your Biostrategy, we had this interview with George Church. He's a very famous synthetic biologist that works at the Broad Institute, which is this joint institute between MIT and Harvard. And he said that the first people that would be genetically modified using CRISPR, the gene editing tool, would be people who, for example, have genetic diseases that could be very treatable if you treat sperm. So that way you could prevent that trait from being carried to the next generation. But he also predicted that really the first people who would choose to have some kind of genetic modification would be those who'd be looking for performance enhancements. So like the ability to run further or faster or for focus. And then there's this whole longevity trend that we talk a little bit about, and eventually we have to get someone on here to talk about longevity, where people are biohacking to live longer. All of us who exercise, probably there's a part of us where we're thinking this is going to help me live longer. I know for me, I think every hour in the gym is one day less in the hospital when I'm 90 or whatever. But if it were me, what would I genetically enhance myself for? I think lower fat level and better focus. Those would be my two things. I'd like to be able to just turn on the focus and shut the world off and just stay focused on the thing that I'm working on. Being able to stay healthy and hike like into an advanced age, whatever that means. I see people who are older having a hard time moving around. Mobility is a big issue. Bones get fragile. Sarcopenia, where you start to lose muscle mass. All those things are real. And I know those are all reasons why I exercise. But Erum, what would you do if you could biohack yourself by choice?
Yeah. Keep in mind, I am not a biohacker, so I don't know what I can change now, or I guess it has to be all my somatic cells because otherwise everything would be just passed down. So one of the things I did try to change, not genetically, which I just did recently, was I would love to get Hawkeye vision so I can see farther. And I was hoping that would have happened when I got LASIK, because when you get LASIK, they say that there's a chance that you can actually have better vision and you can see a lot farther. 20/20 is what everyone gets, but sometimes people get 20/25 vision and they can see farther. And then I would always be in nature. I mean, I do tend to go into nature as much as I can, but to be able to see farther. And then I would say increase lung capacity and being able to basically breathe underwater.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. Do you see Wakanda Forever?
Yeah.
They have the whole civilization that lives underwater.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was crazy.
That's so crazy, but there's a whole world underneath there. I'm really scared because there's some bigger mammals like whales and squid and probably creatures. There is a new Godzilla movie coming out.
Oh, jeez.
It's called Monsters something or another, and I'll look it up later. But, it's just a creature from the deep, deep, deep oceans, which we don't really know a lot about.
A kraken.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like coming out. But I mean, I don't want to go see scary things underwater, but even just to swim and swim far distances and have the energy, stay focused, because you'd have to swim long distances. But even if I had a boat and you can just like hop off, swim, go down deep without having to put on a
scuba gear.
Scuba gear. Yeah, exactly. So those two would be cool.
There's a couple of things that were in the news that I think were interesting we want to talk about before we get into the interview. But you had mentioned wanting to talk about the AI regulation meeting, which I didn't really follow that closely. All the big AI companies, Microsoft, OpenAI, Elon Musk, they were all in Washington. I guess the government organized this event. I didn't really see what the outcome was. What was the news on that?
Well, I think the reason probably why you didn't watch it is because it's just people talking over each other. I mean, what are these big tech CEOs really going to propose? I mean, I think they did propose some good ones. I think I heard that Mark Zuckerberg put some good things out, and it sounded like everyone came out of the meeting feeling positive that they were even able to have this meeting and that there was an alignment that there needs to be some regulation. But then I was reading an article where they quoted Cory Booker as saying that they just need to figure out what the legislation would be. And I was like, why don't they just ask ChatGPT?
But then only Microsoft and OpenAI would ask GPT, because Google and Elon's AI company would ask their own versions of AI. And Meta has its own too, which I do sometimes use.
Yeah, and I wonder if it would be the same. So we should try to do this experiment. But he's like, it's going to be hard to draft the legislation. When I saw that, I was like, oh, let me see. So then I just asked ChatGPT, and I have it customized for myself. So, and I like to be a little bit funny and intellectual. So I decided to ask ChatGPT. And what I said was, okay, so Democrat Senator Cory Booker said the government has a regulatory role to regulate AI, but crafting legislation would be a challenge. And all the participants agreed. So what would you propose to protect humans from AI? So this is the question I asked ChatGPT, and it responded, the AI regulation conundrum. Not an easy nut to crack, especially with the rapid advancements in the field. If I had to say, here are a few legislative points to consider. And it did transparency requirements. So AI developers should disclose how their algorithms work, especially for critical applications like healthcare and criminal justice. Absolutely. I 100% agree in that one. I mean, I don't know a lot about how a lot of these algorithms work. Bias audits. Mandatory third-party audits to identify and mitigate algorithmic biases, such as racial or gender biases. Yeah, of course.
Well, that's a big issue because most of the people who are programming AI are white dudes.
Karl said it. Data privacy, so stricter controls on what data AI systems can collect, how it's stored, and who has access to it. Yeah. I mean, there's so many times where I'm like, if there's like a service I used and like I gave them permission to connect to all my things and I don't opt into that service anymore, or I stop paying for it, I want to make sure that all my data is gone from there and they don't have access. If I forgot to like delete my app, they can't still track me or
right.
I don't want them to use my information anymore. And I'm sure that there's so many companies out there that still have my information, even though I'm not a part of their world anymore. Ethical guidelines. So develop a framework for ethical considerations in AI, not enabling surveillance states or creating autonomous weapons.
Oh, man, I just read something about that this morning, and maybe this was part of what came out of that meeting. Someone said that with $800, they were able to take the guardrails off of, I don't know, let's just say Meta's AI, and they were able to develop biological bioweapons super easily.
Wow.
I mean, that's a huge one.
Huge one. consumer protections, rights to know when AI is making decisions about you and to challenge those decisions if needed, which
That's
I
good.
think that's a really good one. I've seen this. I wonder if it's similar to like, on Instagram or whatever, you see an ad and it's like, is this relevant to you?
Right.
And then you can say no, but I'm sure it goes beyond that. Legal accountability for decisions made by AI, including malfunctions or incorrect decisions that harm people.
That's a huge one.
That's a huge one. There's a lot, especially when talking about making deep fakes. And do they make deep fakes using like Midjourney? Like, how do they make it? Which software did they use? That's a big one. And then R&D, public funding to advance safe AI research so it's not just profit driven. And then ChatGPT just wrapped it up saying, this is just my opinion, of course. Would be interesting to see how politicians, tech CEOs, and experts hash it out. So,
well, and I think it'd be also interesting to take your prompt and drop it into the Meta AI or when the Musk AI is available, what your answers are from each of those and to compare it. I think it's going to be super interesting based on the data sets these things are using. But I mean, the bottom line is AI is going to be embedded in everything, and it's going to be up to us to figure out how we want to live with this entity. And in our space, in biotech, we're seeing a lot of applications, and I think it's really going to change the face of biotech research. What we're able to do and what we're able to conceptualize, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, for us.
Yeah, for us. So I want to just keep things snappy. I was going to talk about Dupla Bio's Labs on Request. Dupla is some good friends of ours. My friend Yvon Jaubert started Dupla about 4 or 5 years ago. We mentored him early on. I've known Yvon for a very long time. And his company Dupla makes it possible to set up a lab for less than $60,000. So it could be an office retrofit or it could be a warehouse site. If you're interested in learning more, drop us a line and we'll connect you with Dupla. Erum, you wanted to talk about this study that says that oral decongestants that are over the counter don't work.
I was so blown away when I saw that in the news. Basically, FDA committee unanimously decided that oral decongestants don't work. I was floored. So oral decongestants are like Sudafed, Benadryl. A lot of these companies make it. They've been on the shelves for so many years.
People just buy them without thinking about them.
They said 1 in 2 people use oral decongestants and on a recurring basis. So they're always buying it every year, using it God knows how many times. And they're just saying, nope, they don't work. So how much money was made because of this therapeutic that didn't work? And will there be any repercussions? Will there be any accountability for this? It just seems so bizarre. I'm sure that there are so many drugs that are on the shelves that don't work. I know that there's a lot of vitamins. That's a whole world. Just making things with a promise of it doing something and it does nothing. And you're just taking this placebo and spending the money. It's not doing anything. So I thought that was really messed up.
It's interesting because like this morning, it was in the news that California is suing all the major oil companies for deceiving the public for decades because the oil companies knew that fossil fuels would heat the planet and destroy the climate. It's really interesting that the state of California is doing this because California had historically been a huge oil producer. I just wonder, would Texas ever be so bold as to sue the oil companies? Probably not. But would the pharmaceutical companies ever be held liable for producing these products that don't work? But that's a topic for another podcast. As we get into the interview, Erum, you know the carbon capture space very well. When I first met you, you had been working for a carbon capture company. Why don't you talk a little bit about that as the intro to our interview?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a startup about 10 years ago. I met them when I was working in India. I ran the fellows program of INK, which is basically a continuance of TED India. So TED India happened, I forget exactly when. So anyway, this company called Damascus Fortune, then we rebranded as Carbon Continuum. And the idea is that you can take carbon emissions from factories and convert it into valuable products. And then in this company's case, it was carbon nanotubes. So being able to create carbon nanotubes from carbon emissions, which there's different grades of them. There's multi-walled carbon nanotubes and single-walled carbon nanotubes. The ones that are single-walled are the ones that are the strongest material. That's like the carbon nanotube graphene, which is a single wall. But you can make multi-walled, which would still have different types of applications for carbon fiber, where it could be like tennis rackets or golf clubs. It doesn't have to be super high beforehand, or super purified as they would use it for airplanes or spaceships. So yeah, it was very, very early stage. It was so out there, but people knew they got the idea of using waste to make a product. Back then, we pitched all over the world. We got a lot of interest. I remember talking to Singularity University, and they were very interested. It was an incredible time, but of course, it was just too early on every single front. For the co-founders, there was Vivek, Venki, and Venkatesh. 3 graduate students.
Holy cow.
Yeah, they came up with it. They created a small experiment, which worked, but to scale it up and create the reactor that was necessary, they found a specialist that made reactors to join their team. And then we worked with that person. But then it's like, who's going to buy the carbon nanomaterials? None of us were like experts in the industry. Unlike our friends at Lanzatech, they got together a very great team of people.
For those of you who don't know Lanzatech is a company that uses microbes to capture carbon, and they do so at big facilities like energy plants or steel mills. By capturing the carbon using these microbes, they're able to turn it into other materials. So they have a number of collaborations with big brands like Adidas or H&M or Lululemon, and they use the carbon that they capture to produce new threads, for example. You can go on adidas.com and shop the Australian tennis collection, and I think most of it is made with Lanzatech derived materials. It's not branded Lanzatech, but that's where that comes from.
And today we have the treat of having the Chief Science Officer, Zara Summers, join us and share her everyday work, what Lanzatech's up to today, and what they're going to be doing in the future. This is a great conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Excellent. So let's start the interview. Sarah Summers, welcome to the Grow Everything podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us. Erum, why don't you kick off the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited to be talking with you. And our audience will find out why when they hear about what you and your team are doing. But this is the Grow Everything Biotech podcast. You have a PhD in microbiology. We always like to ask our guests, what inspired you to go down the path of biology? Also, what did you imagine your career would be when you were studying in university versus where you ended up? So it's like a 2-part journey inspiration question.
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. When I think about what inspired me to go into the field of biology and specifically microbiology was when I realized how diverse life can be. And when you think about the microbial world, I think what drew me initially was the planet's been around for 4.6 billion years, and there's been life on Earth for over 3 billion of that. However, we talk about the dinosaurs and we talk about humanity and the evolution of all the mammals and all the beautiful things we see today. But really, when you think about the microbial world, they have seen empires rise and fall. They've seen the oxygenation of the Earth's atmosphere. And so from a diversity perspective, the microbial world is so fascinating. You have organisms that live in the absence of oxygen, organisms that live on rocks. They gain energy from rocks. They gain energy from just gases. Microbes have done complete terraforming, if you will. You think about the oxygen we breathe today. Initially, that oxygenation event came from microbes in the ocean, not from the trees that you see around us today. That's what really drew me to microbiology, just the massive impact these teeny tiny itty bitty little creatures have had on the planet. When I first started in biology, I thought I would be a science teacher, perhaps junior high or high school. And then later I realized I could get a PhD and teach college. And I've always loved to work with students because it's just so full of hope, right? Talk about feeling good at the end of the day is when people think anything is possible. It's just so fun to help those minds expand even further. But when I was interviewing for academic jobs, thinking about going into academia to be a professor, I trial interviewed in industry. And I never looked back because they basically said it's a blank slate. Come help our company shape how we see the world and how we can make chemicals and products. So I originally worked for a large oil and gas company for about a decade, shaping their biofuels, biochemicals, understanding how biology could shape. And now I work at Lanzatech, which is even more exciting because we're actually doing it at a commercial scale. I still like to communicate about science, but yeah, I never really ended up being a professor.
You said you had even interviewed for academic jobs.
Yeah.
How did you make the leap from that academic job to a commercial job? I think a lot of scientists maybe don't even realize they can do that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences is in academia, in the sciences, you're running your own lab. So you're deciding what grants you're going to apply for. You have to get funding so that you can do your work. When I interviewed in industry, I think what became very clear to me was the level of impact an individual can have, if leveraged in the right way, can be so much larger than just one lab work, publish a few papers. You can take an idea and actually make a commercial product. You can drive that innovation pipeline from ideation to discovery to development to full commercialization. And I think, especially from a climate perspective, digging into jobs that somebody only thought could be possible and seeing it make a commercial product that are clothes or shoes you put on your body or perfume you wear that came from recycled carbon, I think that sealed the deal for me. Having that level of impact of application was just so impactful for me.
It's interesting because you said you enjoyed students because they're very hopeful and like anything is possible. Yet you're in this career where you are making the impossible possible. So it's really interesting that you're here now. You are living this dream. I think it'd be great if you can give us the spiel of what is Lanzatech and what exactly are you doing? You mentioned a little bit of it. You gave us a little taste, but can you share a little bit more?
Yeah. So Lanzatech really is a company that looks at carbon differently. So when you think about the climate, you might think about decarbonization. And really what Lanzatech is trying to do is take carbon and recycle it. So every carbon is precious. We have enough waste, enough carbon above ground today that we can make all the products we need that we typically think of maybe we need fossil fuel for. So instead of extracting additional petroleum out of the ground, why not just grab carbon from the atmosphere or divert carbon that would end up going into the atmosphere from heavy industry like steel or oil and gas refining and pump it through a unique bioreactor that we have where we have these ancient organisms. One of the first life forms on Earth was able to use reduced gases. So our organism is able to use carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen to produce ethanol. We pump these industrial gases through our bioreactor. What comes out the other end is a liquid that has cells, water, and product. So we can distill the ethanol off and take that ethanol, turn it into jet fuel, turn it into clothing products, turn it into the soles of your running shoes, that EVA foam, turn it into the ethanol that is in a Gucci perfume, for example, the ethanol that you're putting on your body, all made from this recycled carbon that would have ended up in the atmosphere had our plant not been there to take it and convert it through this microbial process. It's really mind-blowing because I don't know that many people understand that this is not science fiction. It's not just happening in a lab. It's happening at these massive, massive plants around the world. So we have plants in Asia and a new plant that's just starting up this year in Belgium, in Ghent, beautiful town that's going to have a beautiful biorefinery located just outside. So it's really exciting.
So, Sarah, when you are talking about capturing this carbon, I think of that as being carbon sequestration. Is that correct? You are sequestering carbon? Clarify, please.
Yeah. When you think about it, we're taking carbon that was either in carbon monoxide that would have been flared to CO2. If we have hydrogen present, we can actually take carbon dioxide itself and we turn it into ethanol. So when that ethanol goes to jet fuel, what you're getting is a fuel that is still going to be combusted into the atmosphere. But instead of a virgin fossil molecule being pulled from the ground, it's essentially taking CO2 that would have already gone to the atmosphere and then reusing it. So your fuel has a different type of impact. That's not necessarily sequestration, but it's definitely carbon capture and utilization play. So it's a transformation of that carbon to a second use. When direct air capture comes online, we can also take CO2 from direct air capture coupled with green hydrogen. And that's an even different model where you're pulling atmospheric CO2 to then make jet fuel. That would be a circular economy where you no longer need fossil carbon from below the ground to power those. It can be a circular model where it's in the atmosphere, you capture it, you put it in a jet, it's in the atmosphere, you capture it, you put it in a jet. When we think about sequestration, we can also make durable goods. We can make clothing, we can make things like polyethylene. And so that's a different type of locking that carbon into a durable good that's not necessarily going to go back into the atmosphere. It's no longer a fuel. It's something people are going to have in their homes. It can go into furniture. It can go into clothing. It can go into shoes. So that's a different model as well. We're an alternative, I would say. When you hear about carbon capture and sequestration, they're talking about pumping carbon dioxide underground. And what's that doing is it's locking it away, but it's enabling additional petroleum to be pulled from the ground. What we're saying is you don't need to pull additional petroleum from the ground. You can actually recycle carbon that's already above the ground. So while carbon capture and sequestration is going to work in some areas, we think that our technology enables people to still have the products that they need every day, but it's getting it from a different source. It's getting it from a source that would have once been thought of as a waste.
That's so fascinating. There's so many solutions. There's so many problems that you're solving. I did want to highlight that you said you can make clothing from your process, but you are making clothing from this process.
That's right.
I know we're going to jump ahead, but just because you brought it up and I'm thinking about it, I would love for you to share a little bit more. You mentioned the polyethylene. Tell us about what clothing. That's really exciting. And we'll talk about other products in a bit.
Yeah. So from a clothing perspective, we've had, for example, 2 separate capsule collections with Zara. So same name, different, not a person, not me, but a company. So they've done these beautiful cocktail dresses, and we have some here sprinkled around our facility. So you have these industrial labs and you have these cocktail dresses. It's such a powerful image when you think about pollution, when you think about what would have been a giant stack of vented emissions into the atmosphere, getting diverted through a bioprocess to make this beautiful chic cocktail dress. So there was the first collection was all black, little black dresses. The second collection was a spring collection that was hot pink and white and just gorgeous stylized dresses. Amazing. And 25 to 30% of that carbon was from steel mill emissions. Mind blowing. We then did a collection with H&M Move. So all black, sleek workout gear. We also worked with Adidas to provide ethanol that turned into polyester and other products that filled their entire Australian Open collection, the Melbourne collection this past year. So some of it you can still buy online if it's not all sold out. There were over 30 different items, from men's tennis shirts to workout shorts, to women's tennis dresses, sports bras, shorts, and even a couple pairs of shoes. So over 30 different items, where I believe 25% of that carbon in the product was from our steel mill ethanol produced from emissions.
It's amazing.
Pretty amazing.
Do you have all those? Do you have all those items?
So I have a lot. My whole family is actually decked out in Adidas tennis clothes. Well,
nice.
Yeah, I remember seeing Michael Kopke, your chief innovation officer, wearing one of the Adidas jackets at SynBio Beta.
Yep.
And striking jacket, you open it up, it's very colorful. But just to really think about it, how it was produced is just an amazing thing. I'm kind of curious, you have put these facilities, or I think of what LanzaTech is doing as like a facility, even though it might be better described as a containerized set of microbes that are turning carbon into ethanol or other products. But when you go into a facility, what are the kinds of facilities that you're in right now? Where does it make sense? And am I right in saying it's a containerized lab or something?
So it looks more like an oil and gas refinery. So we have huge bioreactors that tower over you. We have distillation, wastewater treatment, everything all together outside. So the types of places we have deployed our big commercial plants in are places like steel mills, ferroalloy production site. And we recently are in the process of commissioning our first oil and gas refinery at Indian Oil, the national oil company of India, at their Panipat refinery. We now have our reactors operating off one of their tail gases, a pressure swing absorption tail gas. Pretty amazing. We also work at places like, we've partnered with Sekisui in Japan. So we have a 1/10 commercial scale demonstration site that takes unsorted municipal solid waste, so garbage that you throw out and collect in bags, construction waste, home waste, just garbage, and a claw picks it up and dumps it into a gasifier. The gasifier takes that garbage and makes syngas, so it's a mix of CO, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen that then feeds our reactor. So we're making ethanol from garbage there. That's actually really exciting when you think about landfills, especially countries like Japan that don't have the space for landfills landfills, where your option is to burn or incinerate that garbage. You might get a little power out of it, but there's a lot of emissions associated with that. Imagine being able to put up a whole chemical plant where you're making products for people based off of garbage you've thrown away. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And can I ask a follow-up on that? When you pick up all that garbage and you gasify it, what happens to the garbage? What's the end state of the garbage you threw in there?
So gasifier technology is really fascinating. It's kind of a newer technology. So you're able to, in Japan, it's a plasma gasifier, where you're able to heat the garbage to an extremely high temperature. And instead of incinerating it, you're forcing it down to molecular gases. You've essentially converted that garbage to nothing but usable gas for our organism.
100% of it? All of it?
Yeah. There might be some metals or something that end up as glass in the bottom that you can remove, but when you think about it from a biomass perspective, we can also do it at lower temperature, less extreme conditions. If you have extra wood, let's say you're in an industry where you have orchards and every year you have a certain amount of wood waste, or you're doing responsible forestry and you're managing your forest where you're removing dead trees so that you're less of a fire risk, for example. You can collect that wood and throw it in a big pile and it might degrade over time back into CO2, through normal processes. Like when a tree falls in the woods, does it rot? The answer is always. But if we pull those trees, what we can do is push it through a gasifying technology. When it's all wood waste, we can do less extreme conditions. It'll make a little bit of biochar and then syngas that we can feed our process. And biochar we can then sell to agriculture. It helps fluffiness of the soil, which is always good. And so that would be a byproduct there. But yeah, really of a super massive high temperature, you don't want anything other than syngas coming out of them.
When you are talking about using this garbage to make products or maybe fuel, it reminds me of Back to the Future.
The banana peel in like the Mr. Fusion or whatever on the back of the DeLorean.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's
Are we there?
a little bit of a reach for us, but like we could do it on a massive scale, but we can't do it on your car yet.
Okay.
Did you say the facility in Japan is about a tenth of the size of your normal? Did I get that wrong? How big is that? Is it a container, shipping container? What does it look like?
Oh, no, it's still huge. It's massively huge. So in Japan, in order to commercialize the process within the country, you have to prove that it works at what they call 1/10 scale of commercial. It's just a process for building a commercial technology up in Japan. And so it's a step that the Japanese government requires. So if you can get the 1/10 scale built, and you show that it's operational, they'll then give you a commercial plant. So our commercial plants range plus or minus 10,000 tons, but it's about 50,000 tons per year in a normal commercial plant that we do. So 50,000 tons of ethanol. Global capacity at the end of this year, we're going to be grabbing 200,000 to 300,000 tons of carbon at just the commercial plants we have today. And so there's a lot more in the engineering pipeline and planning and building that'll come online over the next few years. But we're going to be able to address the CO2 footprint of heavy industry in the gigaton scale within the next decade for sure. I mean, it's a gigaton scale problem. We know it is. The more rapidly we get our plants out there, the faster we're drawing down gigatons of carbon.
So when you're working with the oil and gas companies or the steel mills, how are they being incentivized to have your big structures next to their steel mills and to have their waste gas being used? Besides, I mean, there's the ESGs, but what is the other incentive? Are they just signing up?
Yeah, I thought about it in two ways. We're able to help them with a carbon footprint perspective, but we're also able to make them money. So they now have a whole new revenue stream where before we move in, they would vent all the CO2 into the atmosphere. Because we talk about CCS all the time, but what people maybe don't realize is there's not underground storage everywhere. The earth is not uniform. The earth is full of lots of different geology. So unless you're sitting right on top of an underground saline aquifer, for example, you're going to have to build a pipeline and lots of infrastructure to route your CO2 anywhere but the atmosphere. What we offer is an on-site where you're not having to transport CO2. You're able to convert it, which is great because your emissions now drop. However, you also have a product to sell. We negotiate offtake with these emitters where we get a portion, they get a portion, and they're able to make money. At the end of the day, they're saving from an emissions perspective, but they're making money because they're able to sell that ethanol as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
this idea of waste as a resource is, I think, relatively new, but on the scale that you guys are doing it, it's definitely new. But I'm kind of curious, you mentioned H&M, Adidas, Zara doing collaborations with you, but what does it look like on the other side of these big oil and gas steel companies? Who are they?
Yeah, we're kind of at this nexus. We're in between people that have sometimes mandates, sometimes demands, sometimes just their own climate goals that they've set out. And then we have consumer brands that are clamoring for sustainable products that are recycled carbon. It's not just bio-based anymore because bio is going to be challenged from a water, from a land use, from a competing with food perspective. So we're offering a product that is a different type of carbon from a recycled carbon perspective. So when we think about who do we start with, it's the Indian Oil Company, it's the Shaogang steel producer, it's the Sekisui Municipal Solid Waste Management companies. I think it's some of the demonstrations that we've done. It's with waste management. It's with different oil and gas companies. We've had investments from Shell, Mitsui, large global companies that are looking for ways to diversify their portfolio of technologies that are addressing CO2.
That's amazing. I mean, I wrote this really big in my notes, 300,000 tons of carbon. I just assume you guys are winning all these awards. I mean, where's the Nobel Prize? What's like, this is just so huge. I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, we know about it.
It's not big enough.
I love you. That's amazing. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to kind of keep my cool because we do fangirl Lanzatech a lot. In our previous episodes, we have talked about you guys. Some of these questions are for you, our listeners, who have not maybe listened to some of the previous episodes. But if you have listened to it, you're like, finally, Lanzatech's on here. You guys just keep talking about them all the time. Obviously, like I mentioned, like the clothing's very fascinating because of clothing sexy, the luxuries, it's tangible. All your products are tangible. You mentioned biofuel, jet fuel. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of just curious in terms of the products, what products are you supporting the most right now, just in terms of what has converted and what's out there versus whether it's clothing, the jet fuel, or other things? I was curious to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer from a what we're doing today, and then maybe I'll give you a preview of what's next, because that's also really exciting. So I am the chief science officer, so I have to hold back on some of my exuberance over where we can go in the future, right? It's never enough. It's an insatiable appetite for converting carbon. That's what we have. We will not rest until we have a stabilized climate. We have a sister company, a company that we spun out of Lanzatech called LanzaJet. And LanzaJet is a unique company. And the reason why we spun it out is that it's not a bio-based technology. We created it to produce jet fuel and diesel. You can tune it. If you want to make more diesel, you can tune it to make more diesel. If you want to make more jet fuel, the chemistry and the catalysis can be driven to make more jet fuel. And the reason why we spun it out is we take ethanol to fuel in a catalytic conversion. So no biology at all. It's just chemistry. We wanted it to be ethanol agnostic. We wanted it to be able to take sugar-based ethanol from corn or sugarcane. We didn't want it to be tied to just our ethanol because we can't make enough ethanol today to fill the need of, if you look at the amount of SAF or sustainable aviation fuel that the world is asking for today, we knew our technology could answer to that, especially if we opened it up and said any ethanol can get converted through this process. Right now, we are in the process of finalizing the plant. It's all there. The steel's in the ground. We're getting it started up soon, or LanzaJet is. In the south of US, in Georgia, it's going to be a 10 million gallon per year SAF production site. So that's 10 million gallons per year of sustainable aviation fuel, which is going to be huge. And that's still not enough. We still need to build a lot more plants, because if you think about how much demand is out there, that's only a drop in the bucket. So we make fuel with our ethanol as the feedstock that are offered at a similar price point to what they're used to, but are offering climate benefits. And one of the things that really drew me to LanzaTech as an individual was I don't feel like climate technology is always accessible, meaning your everyday person doesn't necessarily even have the choice to make a climate smart decision at the store or for their families. One of the other missions here at LanzaTech is really kind of expanding that accessibility. So if you notice what we make commodity chemicals. So when I think about what's next in our pipeline, commodity chemicals are things that are broadly used in a lot of different products so that everyday people are going to be able to access. We want every person in the world to be able to hold something in their hand that they've purchased for their family that's a climate smart choice. That's very different than a lot of other climate tech companies where they're focused on high-end electric vehicles that very few people can afford if you look at the global population. We really want to go after massive impact from a CO2 drawdown perspective, but also the accessibility of everyday people just living their lives, but getting to make that choice, because that choice is not today accessible for the majority of the world's population. What gets me really excited is we make ethanol today, but we also have an awesome synthetic biology team. And when I think about some of the strains that they're creating, we have a very unique organism. I told you it's one of the earliest life forms on Earth that has evolved to be this unique clostridial species. Very few people can even grow it, but we've unlocked the complete genetic system. So we can genetically engineer it to make products that imagine having a chemical plant in a single bioreactor where one day you're making ethanol, 3 months later you drain that and you put in a new strain of our organism and you're making isopropyl alcohol, you're making acetone, you're making monoethylene glycol. These are the building blocks of pretty much every chemical product that is on and in your household today. We have research right now looking to replace palm oil with our process. If you think about palm oil from a biodiversity threat, from not only biodiversity, but the more extreme climate events our planet is going to experience, the more challenged rubber, all of these tropical products produced from very specific plants in very specific regions are going to continue to be threatened. And as the world's desire for these types of products grow, it's putting these environments at risk because they're going to expand these plantations and they're going to cut down more rainforests. What we're going to do is take your carbon emission and make products that basically can replace palm oil in the hundreds and thousands of products that are in your lives today that contain palm oil. So those are some of the R&D areas that we're looking at that are pretty exciting.
Yeah, as you started the answer to that question, you hinted at future tech that you get excited about that you don't really talk about. And what you just gave us a preview of is amazing. But what are some of those future things you're thinking about that we'll be able to do, let's say, in 5 or 10 years?
So I think in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to be essentially creating an entire chemical plant at one of our sites. The same reactors that are making ethanol today are going to be producing additional products in the future. So we're working to commercialize chemicals beyond ethanol because we look at everything on my desk right now that contains carbon is probably derived mostly from petroleum. So I look at the packaging, I look at the pens, I look at the electronics that are encased in plastic, I look at the shoes on my feet. Ethanol is a building block for many of these things, but not all of these things. And in order to get complete carbon kind of autonomy from fossil, only take above ground carbon, what we can do is create new strains of bacteria of our special microbe that we love to make additional commodity chemicals like isopropanol, acetone, monoethylene glycol or MEG, palm oil alternatives. If you think about what's in your cosmetics, the emulsifiers that keep your shampoo from separating into 3 phases. These are all products that you have grown accustomed to using and you will continue to want access to. So we would like to provide you with alternatives to fossil-based products.
When you're thinking of these products, like you're talking about the pens replacing plastics, because right now plastics are made from petrochemicals. Mm-hmm. So in terms of creating it, like right now, you also talked about using garbage too. And plastic is a huge issue. So when you're thinking of the circular economy, have you thought about using plastic to make plastic, to use plastic? And what would that look like?
No, and that's exactly right. Plastic is fantastic because plastic is a carbon and hydrogen dense waste that is really high in caloric value. And so when we put that in a gasifier, you get really good feedstock gas out of the back end. It does totally enable a circular economy. When you think about plastic recycling today, the majority of plastic recycling is mechanical. So you take it, you melt it down again. Every time you melt down polyethylene, you don't get clear bottles anymore. You lose some of those key properties that make that plastic good. And so you down in grade. You can take a clear plastic Coke bottle or clear plastic soda bottle and convert that to a fleece jacket. But you can't really make a clear plastic bottle again because you're going to get color issues. Your quality is going to degrade. What we enable is a full molecular recycling when we take it back to gas. And so we can make that pure plastic, clear plastic bottle every time. So it's just a different way of thinking about recycling. It's enabling more use of the carbon rather than, there's only so many park benches that you can make the world's plastic bottles before you run out of parks that need benches. I don't know.
We could use some in the city for sure. Some more benches.
Everywhere. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, I also was thinking about the clothing. Clothing is also a huge waste issue. So you guys have this mindset of being circular. So anything you're producing, do you feel a sense of responsibility to make sure that your clients are also living up to their standards? And then there's also consumers, trying to get them to be a part of this whole message and play a role.
No, and I think that's right. And I think when we're talking to consumer brands, especially, there is a sense of responsibility that we're getting from the brands, like On Running shoes and other clothing brands that we've worked with. They are really interested in a circular economy. And so you can imagine a subscription shoe where you send them back and you get a new pair after your watch tells you you've run 300 miles on your running shoes. And then those shoes could go get gasified and turned into new shoes. We absolutely have been demonstrating with major brands this circular possibility where we work with them to take their clothes, to take their shoes and do gasification and show that we can basically go all the way around the wheel. We've done that with a lot of brands I won't name, but know that they're probably in your closet.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's it going to take for us to kind of reach this post-pollution future? Is that something we'll see in our lifetimes? What does that look like?
I think we can get there. Number one, what it's going to take is broad adoption. I think it's hard being first, right? So we are first. And I think what we're doing is paving the road so those that come behind us will have an easier road. When we came onto the scene, it was like recycled carbon and people were like, what's that? So I think the more that it's talked about, the more that people understand the benefits of diverting carbon from the atmosphere and just keeping it in this nice circular economy where we're making what humanity needs without having to extract more carbon from the ground. I think that's powerful. Policy that's written that is outcome driven, honestly. When we look at some of the policies that we're really pushing for alternative fuels or the biofuels, a lot of that policy was written with the solution kind of predefined to get to an outcome. And I think what that's done is it's stifled a level of innovation. When you think about new players coming on the scene, we're not always going to get credits, but we feel like as we become more well-known and as we talk to people in government around the world, we're a global company. People are realizing, oh, we excluded you because we didn't know you existed. So it's raising that awareness. That's kind of critical. And so when I say outcome driven, it's we cause less carbon to be in the atmosphere while making the same products people need. And I think that's the critical thing. It's not, don't define the path. Tell me the outcome you want. And just think about if we could start to get government incentives that really focused on, hey, we want less carbon, not, hey, take this one path to get to lower carbon in the atmosphere. Think of all the technology that could come forward. Think of all the people that would have a seat at the table. And I always say this, I'm like, it's not pie, right? There's so much carbon. Like we want competitors. We want people doing this with us. We alone as a company cannot defossilize and remove enough carbon from the atmosphere. We want everybody else to come with their awesome ideas and their unique ways to draw down carbon because it's not pie. There's plenty of pie. It's pie everywhere. So I think it's moving in the right direction. And I think the average consumer, my kid's in first grade and he understands climate change and he knows what it means to have emissions and he understands why we ride bikes on the weekend to the library rather than drive. If I look back at when I was growing up, that level of awareness wasn't present in kids. I think we're building that future today.
Are we building it fast enough? Because things are happening now.
Yeah. And I think people need a little bit of a shake, grab them by the shoulders and shake them. Because if you think about what's happening around the world, some of the temperatures we've hit this year, probably not fast enough. It's never fast enough. Humans and Change is a really interesting study. I think you should get some sociologists on the podcast and talk to them about what it takes for humans to embrace change or embrace a different way of doing things, because I think that's a fascinating study. Until it's in their backyard, I think some people's heads are buried in the ground.
Yeah, and understanding exponentials is something that we just don't do.
Oh, yeah.
People don't
Yes.
understand the progress that we're making and how some of this progress is happening so quickly, while at the same time not understanding how the impact we've already had on the planet is also accelerating at an
That's right.
exponential.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Couldn't agree with you more.
So
we need a new course in
Yeah,
school.
we do. Yeah. Everybody needs, exactly. Exponential technologies and why you need to understand them. It should be part of everything. You also, Sarah, work as an advisor to the Nature Conservancy. How did you get involved with them, and how does carbon dioxide affect biodiversity, and how is the Nature Conservancy addressing that?
Oh man. Yeah. It's such a great organization. A lot of the NGOs that I've met and talked to over the years are doing so many different things. And so if you're listening, please donate time, donate money, donate whatever to these organizations, because what they really focus on is the impact. So climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity loss are big key areas for them. How to expose people to what those solutions could look like. So from an education and an outreach perspective, helping communities understand the activities that they do and how they impact the world around them is also an area that they spend a lot of time. I've always had a deep interest in conservation. So as a biologist, I actually started out as a microbial ecologist. So teeny tiny things, but looking at the diversity and how environmental impacts can change and have impacts on diversity is near and dear to my heart. And then when we think about things like what we call charismatic macrofauna, which just means big things that are fun to look at, like birds and animals. It's very similar. Small perturbations in an environment can have major impacts on biodiversity, and people don't even realize how many species are going extinct every day on the planet because of climate change, because of habitat loss, because of urbanization. And I think from a Lanzatech perspective, it really goes hand in hand, because what we're trying to do is offer alternatives to things that might require a lot of land. So when you think about biofuel, there's a lot of areas where biofuel makes sense, but then there's some where you're going to have to convert natural prairies or grasslands or rainforest or forest or deciduous forest or whatever type of forest into agriculture to do on-purpose biofuel crop production. That is going to draw from local water sources. So even if you're not hurting an ecosystem, you could be impacting in a way where you're diverting water, or you've changed the pattern of a migrating bird or something. And so there's all of these other impacts that go along with when we do land use change. And I think organizations like the Nature Conservancy really try to track and understand how to do things with minimal impact to things that can't speak up for themselves, like trees, like animals, birds, lizards, newts, whatever, what have you. I've always tried to help out anywhere I can with all these organizations because I just feel like it's incredibly important. There are some synergies with what we're doing at Lanzatech. Like I said, from a minimizing land use change by offering alternatives to ethanol production from corn, for example, we can do ethanol production from emissions. And so that right there gives you an option or optionality to do sustainable ethanol without having to go after more land or water.
We really appreciate the comments on biodiversity. We recently had Ben Novak from Revive and Restore on our podcast, and he talked about how to maintain the biodiversity of our planet, being able to have biobanks and trying to maintain it. Karl and I went to a conference recently, SynBioBeta, and one of the speakers from a cultivated meat company, they put some interesting stats up on the world's mammal population today, and 62% of the world's mammals are livestock, and then 34% are humans, and just 4% are wild mammals. I mean, talk about biodiversity, like with wild mammals, like the rhinos, the giraffes, they're all dwindling. I mean, we know this because it put up the pie chart and we saw that. I was shocked. It was very shocking to see that most of the world's mammals are livestock.
Yeah. No, I believe it. It's sad, really. But I do think with providing alternatives to products that negatively impact biodiversity is one way that we see we can help. We've also thought about how to use biomass differently, because I told you about this gasification technology.
Yes.
If you'll allow me to geek out for about 3-minute warning, I get very enthusiastic. Okay.
Yes, please.
Please do.
Imagine a world. Imagine a world where you are rehabbing prairies. Let me explain this to you. So there are habitats throughout the world where agriculture has encroached upon them and decimated them. And then agriculture is actually pulled back. So a lot of the fields today, if you fly over the US, even in the peak of production in summer, are brown. Why is that? Because there's nothing growing on it, because you have to pump so much nitrogen into these depleted soils. It's just sometimes not worth it. So you have these fallow fields that are throughout the Midwest and all over America, not to mention Africa, India, South America. There are plots of land that just can't produce anymore because they've gone from soil to dirt. One of the best ways to turn dirt back into soil is to increase the carbon content. Soil carbon is really roots and microbiology. It's bacteria, living and dead, that create goo and all sorts of great sticky compounds that they grow from plant roots and basically help the dirt become soil, help the soil become water retaining. It's just a beautiful process. And the way that you do that is you get native plants to regrow. Talking about seed banks, we need these seed banks to help bring back these native plants that we've basically mowed and pulled out of existence. So you bring back about 20 different species of prairie grass, perennial. You mow them at the end of the season. After the songbirds come through, after the seeds have dropped, you mow them. What that does is it triggers something in the grass to drive deeper roots. Because imagine these prairies that had wild hundreds of thousands of bison, of other migrating animals that used to walk through every once in a while, maybe once a year in a given plot of land and chew it down to nothing. That stimulated the root growth so the grass could grow back the next year, taller, bigger, more robust. And you can get prairie grasses that have 20-foot root systems, 20 feet deep. Roots leak sugars, sugars grow microbes, microbes makes dirt into soil. Rehabbing these prairie grasses while stimulating these animals eating it, you don't actually need to grow the animals. You can just mow it, collect that biomass, put it through a gasifier, and feed our process. Imagine that. Or you collect it, mix it with livestock manure, poop in an anaerobic digester, make biogas, take the biogas, make it into syngas, and feed our process. So we do see a lot of opportunity where we actually work hand in hand with conservation efforts, especially on purpose diverse biomass. So it's different than biofuel. It's not growing a monoculture that doesn't support native wildlife. We could still support songbird migration, still support insect and pollinators through this process, because we don't actually need it to be a particular species of grass. It can be a massively diverse set of grasses that are region specific, native grasses that we feed into our carbon recycling. And what is a plant other than just nature's direct air capture, right? And so you're drawing down CO2 into the above ground biomass, but also drawing down CO2 into the soil. Because the deeper those roots grow, the more carbon in the ground. And so think of a massive 20-foot long root system in a given plot of land. You can sequester tons of carbon per acre per year in these types of systems. Anyway, just a vision of how we could do even more.
Oh, wait, so this isn't happening?
Which should be.
Oh, damn it. All right.
But what we're doing is not monetized. We're doing it in the name of conservation. And you know what's really hard is to get people to care about conservation when they're worried about feeding their families. Remember, we talked about accessibility. You want to be able to make the choice that benefits the climate. But when you're worried about other things, it's a luxury actually to care about the climate. I'll be honest. It's very privileged to think about climate choices. What we're doing is, I think as LanzaTech can enable conservation efforts through this. We take biomass and convert it to gas, make products. So imagine a world where instead of just making conservation efforts in a given area, we're linking that to a revenue generating product market. We're making a chemical plant nearby. That local economy is making products that go into high-end shoes and cleaning products and laundry detergent that they can use in their home, into plastic bottles, into everything that they need. But you've created a revenue stream, because when you just go after conservation, while it's good, many people will want to do it. But if you don't have the luxury of making that decision, what we're doing is making conservation make you money. Conservation that then can be tied to a new revenue stream that didn't exist before. It also gets around supply chain constraint. If you have chemical plants distributed throughout the country, with all the crazy weather we're having, if we have a massive ice storm in Houston, that city is shut down. That's where a lot of our chemicals come from. If you have these distributed chemical plants where you say, hey, I can do a lot with biomanufacturing, I can have these pockets of distributed chemical production throughout our country. You've also made your supply chain more resilient. You've brought some level of domestic resiliency from having to transport things far distances. You're shrinking that. We've gotten so used to, over the last 150 years, thinking about everything the way that the oil and gas companies want us to see them, where you have to have these massive consolidated production sites. You don't have to. It's just what we've doing. The answer isn't, well, because that's the way we've always done it. Now is the time to say, hey, is there a different way? And that's what I challenge people to think. Just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean we have to continue to do it that way. It's just a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, Erum, we kind of have talked about it a bit in the past in terms of this idea of distributed biological manufacturing. But I think the way you described it really brought it home. And this idea of rewilding the prairies is super compelling in the Kim Stanley Robinson book, Ministry for the Future. There is a chapter that every time I've read it, it brings me to tears because you have all these different people from different, very local organizations around the world describing what they're doing to bring back the environment that originally had been where they live. And yeah, we did have this tremendous biodiversity across the country, which we sacrificed in the name of cheap food, cheap fuel, cheap meat. And I think that we will reach this balance where on the one hand, we'll have precision fermentation for a lot of the food that we take for granted, while also rebuilding the environment in a way that's going to be good for the planet. So I'm excited. And I think the way you described it, Sarah, was really very inspiring.
We need like a redo or a great reset. I feel like we sort of played around with that during the lockdowns. They're all locked down, everyone's staying home, and they were saying canals in Venice were getting cleaned and all the wildlife just started coming out like, oh, okay, the safe, like the humans aren't here. And then we just spend like one more year and we just recalibrate. Like, all right, do we really need to have this way of doing things? I really appreciated what you said about the way things were done doesn't mean it has to keep being that way. We can change things, just need to come up with a plan and execute it. And you have a great plan for the prairies. So, if that's, I put the proposal out there, Nature Conservancy, like, hello, this is something that I'm sure there's a lot of passionate people that would jump on it with the right incentives.
Yeah.
Be fun.
Exactly.
Sounds like terraforming. It's terraforming.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it is terraforming. It is.
Yeah, NASA, this is your project. We'll give you the prairies to work on, and then you can go in outer space and do it in Mars.
Yeah.
No big deal.
No big deal. We want to be mindful of time because we have gone over. Erum, was there anything that we missed?
There's so many things we missed, Karl, because the conversation is awesome.
It's always what happens.
I know. Oh, man. One thing we do like to ask all of our guests is there a book, movie, or show that inspires your biological sense, really motivates you to do what you do every day, or just inspires you in the world of biology?
I do recommend, if people haven't seen Kiss the Ground, thinking about the prairie and the things you can do with soil from a carbon drawdown perspective, I highly recommend the documentary Kiss the Ground. A good group of people that I've interacted with a lot throughout the years have put out a show called Prairie Profit. And profits with a dollar sign, because it's all about how do we take these conservation efforts and monetize them. I think that's really eye-opening, and it spans academics and farmers and then industry folks and how they see domestic U.S. prairies as this untapped resource. I personally, just to help educate people on how important this could be, those are two that I find really inspiring because the people are doing really good work.
That's amazing. That's really great. And just like so sad watching some of these debates, they're always about something so lame, but no one's talking about the prairies. If you want to talk about the growing of the economy,
manufacturing and domestic resiliency, and let's make all the products we need. And I know.
your son messed up, taking jabs at people's families. Like, this is like so sad. Like, let's just focus on the bioeconomy and what
economy. We can do to solve big problems. Yeah.
That would be nice.
That would be nice.
Maybe we can include government and
solution for that.
Yeah.
We can dream microbiomes. Maybe we need to give them some probiotics with happy bacteria. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we need to have you back on because that sounds awesome. You and Stephanie Culler from Persephone Biosciences will have a microbiome discussion.
Yeah. Microbiomes are fascinating. It's fascinating work. And we're just beginning to understand all the impacts. So it's cool.
Yeah.
Microbiology rules.
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you and getting to meet you. We met a lot of your colleagues. They're all amazing. So getting to meet more of the Lanzatech team has been great. This conversation was awesome.
Great. Thank you for a fun afternoon.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir. And please do give Kit and Michael our regards.
I will. Absolutely.
That was a great interview. What did you think, Karl?
I mean, Zara is just amazing. And I'm so inspired by the microbiologists in our world. You wrote it down, and I'm just going to steal it from you. They are a small breed, but they are mighty.
Yeah, they get it. It's so interesting when you hear her talk about the prairie lands. I mean, she mentioned that. I think we could talk about that more, but being able to see how a lot of things are interconnected, especially from the microbiological world, because there's so much going on. There's so many different types of bacteria, protozoa, algae that are making things happen that runs our world.
Right.
So she's able to see the full spectrum, and like the way that she was able to see the full spectrum of reactions and the timescales scaling up, but then how do you scale down? Like, how are you looking at how the microbes are working to be able to produce the very fundamental thing, whether it's a ethanol or we're talking about different types of chemicals made through a biological process. It's just incredible that she was able to talk about that with ease. So I think it helped me. I'm sure it helped a lot of our listeners really understand what Lanzatech is doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's interesting is people forget this planet was built by microbes. Our atmosphere was built by microbes. And these things have been evolving for billions of years. So they have it worked out. And we're just getting smart enough to understand how they do it and how we can leverage what they do. There is some philosophical, I'm not going to say disagreements, but different points of views in terms of how do we use microbes to make the planet a better place than it is now. There is this idea of finding microbes that are in the wild that you can use to do work for us. Or there's the whole thing about modifying microbes to do the work for us. And both of those are very important parallel tracks that are happening today.
Yep. And in the Lanzatech world, they have a diversity of different products that they can make. And yes, they're starting off in fashion, fuels. I'm sure that's very strategic. The LanzaJet, I thought that was really interesting, the LanzaJet fuel. We were talking about our travels and the guilt that we feel taking planes, but imagine a world where you don't feel that guilt because they're using LanzaJet fuel or biofuels, and it's okay. But then they're going into different industries, some of which where our friends live, that some of our friends of the pod, which we always say that we need every solution everywhere all at once. But I thought it was very interesting that they are looking to make palm oil. They're looking to make surfactants and other cosmetic ingredients, which I'm sure there's a lot of room for collaboration, or we need more people to make these types of things from biological processes in a circular way.
Yeah, and I think very few companies have scaled to the level that Lanzatech has. Talking about collaboration, I know that they're very open to collaborating with other companies. So anybody who's looking to scale or learn how to scale, Lanzatech is a great example. And they're very open to talking to you if that's something that you're interested in doing. The other thing is like this whole thing of waste as a resource. I mean, one of our early podcasts, we had the guys from Polybion. They use mango waste, ferment it, and turn it into a biomaterial that is very similar to leather. We're going to see a lot more of these kinds of companies. I've talked to a couple. I look at what they're doing and the waste resources are going after. I'll even say you guys are building easily $1 billion company because there is so much waste and there is so much opportunity to increase circularity in our system. So I'm very excited for these companies, and kudos to Lanzatech for pulling off what they've pulled off.
Yeah, and I think with Lanzatech, the special thing too is that they're creating circularity from a very fundamental resource level. When we're talking about like H&Ms of the world and these companies that actually make the products and they sell it to consumers, they're getting those resources from somewhere, and they're not necessarily extracting those resources. They're just trying to find materials to make jackets or pants or something. So having a company like Lanzatech to make materials at a very fundamental level, it helps trickle down that message, and it helps the buyers of their materials feel more confident and be able to take that message of circularity and trickle it down to the consumer. because as a consumer, not having to make so many decisions, just like trusting that what you're purchasing has been well thought through.
And is good for the planet.
It's good for the planet. I really just need some soap to like clean my kitchen. I can't start thinking of circularity and where it came from. And we are doing that more, and kudos to the consumers that do that. But if we can just go to the store and buy something with the confidence that it's not harming the planet or the people, to talk about taking care of employees. I mean, that's another part of this. But I think that companies like Lanzatech and the companies we talk with enable that. They enable the trust that consumers would want from companies that are making these products.
Right. You had written Rewilding the Prairies in our notes. Why did you put that in our notes, Erum?
I put in the notes because I thought that it touched on a lot of things. I was listening to you. You were very excited about it because the prairies in the middle of America, there's just so much land that could be used. The way that Zara was describing it, I thought that there were things in the works to rewild the prairies, but it doesn't seem like that's really happening yet, but it could be. And the biggest point that she made, I thought, was how do you incentivize conservation and leverage it, continuing to conserve, continuing to rewild land, terraform land, and you can make things for consumers and people in a way that's, again, circular, sustainable, but you can still bring back to life this barren land that there's nothing going on, but there's vast amounts of it.
Yeah.
So how do we figure that out? How do we rewild not just the plants? I think Zara's point was like, okay, they can take these prairie grasses and use it for making things as part of their carbon cycle of making goods. But how do you reintroduce animals? We have, again, Ben Novak. We've been talking about him a lot, but Ben Novak from Revive and Restore, when we interviewed him on the podcast, and they're bringing back the black-footed ferret, and the black-footed ferret only ate prairie dogs. And I'm guessing prairie dogs are found in the prairies. How do we bring back this ecosystem that we destroyed? I mean, like, let's be real. How do we bring back bison? How do we bring back the land that once was to the US? We mentioned it like, okay, we're looking at terraformation. People are talking about that in the context of Mars, but how do we terraform the barren lands of Earth, you know, and learn from that so that when we go to Mars, that we would have a lot of understanding of how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think maybe that's where we end this podcast. We do have the Grow Everything hotline. If you have a question or a comment or a recommendation of someone you think we should interview, please do text or call us. The number is in the show notes, and you can save it as a contact on your phone as Grow Everything hotline. And you can text us whenever you have a deep thought. We're getting some good comments from people via text. Erum, is there anything else we should say before we shut down the pod?
Nope, not at all. See you next week.
See you later.